Genetically modified crops were kicked out of Europe in 1998 when a scientist named Dr. Pushtai fed genetically modified potatoes to his rats and found out that they totally destroyed the health of the rats. Much to the distaste of Tony Blair and his cronies, who had Pushtai fired the very next day. And Pushtai managed to get his information out, and the European Union said no to genetically modified produce. Now our government is back saying that genetically modified produce is perfectly safe, despite dozens of peer-reviewed scientific independently testing documents which show that it's inherently unsafe. The whole process is an abomination. I mean, America's had genetically modified produce for decades, and they're now up in arms trying to get this stuff labelled and trying to kick it out. And our government is saying that it's perfectly fine to have, and they're introducing it, and they're doing the same thing here that they did in America. They're putting it into the supermarkets in a way that can't be detected. There's no labels on produce which has been fed genetically modified crops. So we're getting genetically modified ingredients into our foods without being able to recognise them in the supermarket, so we can't differentiate between the good and the bad unless we buy organic, which is obviously more expensive, and a lot of people today can't afford to do that. I never heard anywhere on the media channels that 300,000 people have committed suicide in India because of genetically engineered cotton. Why? Our governments are in the pocket of big business and industry. There's just no two ways about it. Do a little research. Look into Monsanto, for example. Look at Monsanto's hold over the American government as to how they manipulate legislation in their favour, as to how they suppress negative results with the help of the government. And our government are, I would say, in their pockets. Why would the United Kingdom government want to introduce genetically modified crops into the United Kingdom when in 1998 it was shown that they were detrimental to health, severely detrimental to health? This isn't a maybe issue, this is they are bad for you. And they're now in our supermarkets. Owen Paterson, our Secretary of State, is pushing them onto us. Why? It's not for our benefit. Nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, I'm going to wait to buy some genetically modified food. We don't want it. Millions of people don't want it, but it's being brought in through the back door. There's not a lot of people talking about it. It's going into our supermarkets and it's unlabelled. And before you know where you are, it's, the ball's rolling. America is now introducing genetically modified meats and genetically modified fish. And the danger is that we're going to lose traditional food. You can't have a whole planet populated by genetically modified crops and keep an alternative. The alternative dies because the genetically modified crops will pollinate, and they will pollinate non-genetically modified crops. And the ludicrous thing is that when that happens, the farmer who has the non-GM produce has to pay a fine to Monsanto for stealing their toxic whatever. Yeah, it's happened in America many times. So traditional farmers are put out of business. GM crops spread by nature of the spread, and there'll come a tipping point when there's no alternative but GM crops. And GM crops are nutritionally deficient, disease-causing, damaging to the environment. The list goes on and on and on. This is utter madness. No one benefits other than governments who have their pockets lined by lobbying funds from big biotech firms, and the biotech firms themselves who are pushing these monstrosities, these excuses for food, onto the public of the world.
And that is, they did a test where they genetically engineered bacteria in order to detect it. They set up detection centers miles around in its circumference and found it everywhere. Now it's found everywhere on Earth. They just did it for a test, and they genetically engineered bacteria, and it's found everywhere on Earth. So you have a situation where if you are intentionally using this dangerous technology, I'll give you an example where it's like a mild example by comparison. The tobacco companies genetically engineered tobacco to have higher levels of addicting nicotine, smuggled it into Brazil and grew it there, where it was adversely affecting the farm workers. They called it tobacco loco because it would cause dizziness just by being near it.
Just being around it.
Then they smuggled the tobacco into the United States and put, I'm told, one cigarette in each pack to increase the addictive quality. So let's say you have a, if you get sophisticated about the DNA and you have certain foods you want to sell, maybe you'll generate, just like you can addict people to cigarettes, maybe you'll generate a response in the DNA of a person to be thirsty for your particular food and your particular nutrient.
No contest.
Or you could change, theoretically you could change the way the brain functions, as we talked, as Rappaport wrote about, intentionally. So, in one sense, we don't know enough about the DNA and RNA to be so targeted, which is the good news. But the bad news is we don't know so much about RNA to be in DNA, so we're incredibly dangerous when we do manipulate it.
Oh, my God.
See, genetically modified engineered foods contain neurotoxins, minute quantities of neurotoxins. And what these toxins do is they cause an insect's stomach, if an insect's feeding on the crop, to burst. You ingest these crops, in the cellular structure is where these toxins reside. So you ingest these toxins go into your gut. We have no way of knowing the devastation to health that can follow from consuming these types of foods. Roundup itself is extremely toxic. It's been proven to be so now, and insects are becoming resilient to Roundup. So insects are living even with the traditionally modified crops. So they're having to increase the amount of Roundup that they're using, or increase the potency of the crops, which is putting more and more chemicals, more and more poisons, more and more toxins into your system if you're eating these crops. And millions and millions and millions of people are absolutely polluting the environment with horrible chemicals. Is this what we want for the future of our children? I don't want it.